go for a they wanted to get in reconstruction of the what you call lost things and all, but unfortunately not much of effort is made when there's a reconstruction of a broken psyche or broken psychological condition of an individual because of a lot of things which what you call happens during a disaster. So we'll be discussing more on that and how as a teacher you can help them out. That's a theme of the issue. So we quickly move on to one by one. So we start with the a definition of a disaster is already you know about it. I'll just quickly browse through it. A hurricane or a tornado or a flood or an earthquake, or it could
Sir,
be
sir,
an
sir, sorry for disturbance.
yeah.
Dr. Chidanand, sir. Sir, your video is muted.
Slide is not moving.
No, sir, it's not moving.
Slide is okay.
Uh,
Yes, sir. Your video is muted.
you mean my camera?
Yeah.
Don't worry about it because because now I'm on talking. I'm on some different place and I'm talking on a desktop. Hmm?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Chidanand, you know me. You have seen me. Okay, what's the problem? Okay. Huh?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm disturbing you. Thank you. Sorry.
No problem. Okay. Anything like
Good
explosion?
afternoon, Lancy, sir.
Good afternoon. Who is on the line?
Sir, little bit slow.
Okay, sir. Because now, to be frank, this is actually extended talk, so I'm trying to reduce it to for 1 hour 15 minutes. That's why I'm little glowing. This one kindly adjust with me because few of the important. I might skip some of the slides, but this entire slides will be given to you later because of the time constraint. Because I just got,
It's okay. Continue, sir. It's okay.
I've got just 1 hour. That's why.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So when you talk about a disaster, it could be a war, or it could be a fire, famine, or epidemic, or it could be recently what we have seen is 2 years back, the corona pandemic, where it can have a lot of impact. And as such, now we are witnessing the Israel and Hamas war or Palestine war, and you can see what is happening there. And whatever seeing is maybe not even 10% of is what's really happening. And as I rightly pointed out, everybody is bothered about the physical reconstruction of the structures, which is there, but nobody is bothered about much about the psychological construction when there's a entire psychology of the individual is broken because of the these damages, which where we are going to uh, highlight more on the talk. A disaster, as we see, it causes a lot of human suffering, not only financial or this one materialistic one, a human suffering, and it really requires a collective human need. Otherwise, it's not called as a disaster. And definitely, we require a lot of help from NGOs and other countries and all progressive ones where to manage the disaster. There are a lot of traumatic events would happen like natural disasters, technological disorders like, and I notice I'm finding on fire issues and all. Then intentions where human people are trying to uh, what do you call produce kind of disaster. The corona has a very good bad name from China that it's a China-made virus. Indirectly, it could be a human intention. I don't know. I'm not because I don't have much evidence, but there are a lot of what you call complaints against China regarding this. And even interpersonal violence and sudden loss, traumatic loss, could also mean a disaster for many people. So now let us quickly get into the Indian condition and the natural disasters which one can find. Now remember, because India is what you call is our geographical area and all. We are quite vast in nature, and it's the most disaster-prone countries in the world. I don't know how many of you know that, because the researchers already said 65% land area is vulnerable to earthquake. That means we are safe with only 35%. Then next condition is the drought condition, and it's increasing. The statistics slightly old one. It's increasing day by day. 70% of land under cultivation prone to drought, and which can bring lot of what you call negative impact on the human lives. Then 5% of land, that is India, 40 million hectares are what you call prone to floods. We are seeing every day, and even today I saw in Tamil Nadu heavy rains for no reasons. Then 8% of land, that is a 8,000 meter of coastal line, is what you call prone to cyclones, and So unfortunately, a major disaster in India had happened every 2 to 3 years, and the toll which is given by human lives and other issues are very high. Now, when you come to what you call the numbers, 50 million or 50 million people affected annually, what you call, that means almost 5 crores of this one, and 1 million houses damaged annually, along with the human, social, and other losses that also happened. Then imagine the loss which is happening. It is 70 million US dollars. That even we cannot even count number of zeros for those what you call amount. So India is really under the threat. Then if we talk about the disasters affecting usually the India, the one of the most prevalent disasters which you on the history, if one can record, these are the things which have been recorded so far. One is the earthquake is one of the major thing which can happen at any place. Then volcanic eruption, not much, but it's there. Then tsunamis and cyclones, floods, and landslide is of, again you can find not only I think last 6 to 8 months back, the amount of landslides and all we have seen in North India is quite high. Bushfires are not much, okay, but a drought is definitely there. Major accidents, like we have seen train accidents and all, like three trains are what you call, whether it's human intention or accidental, but disaster is disaster. Then civil unrest is another one, where we have seen in Manipur what is happening, like civil unrest. Not to blame any party for your kind information, we don't know what is really happening there. And the fire explosion and hazmats happening. And I've added one more, COVID-19, and again we are under the threat now. That is the new strain. So this is where we are under threat, and these are the disasters affecting India. And there's a need for a proper management. So one of the major thing from psychological viewpoint is the stress experienced when the disaster happens. Okay, and it is not a simple stress. It is what you call a traumatic stress. A trauma is a serious effect which is usually negative incident, and this negative incident can produce any demand on our body and mind. So, and it can be at the level of emotions, it can be level of our thinking, and it could be in our actions and what physiological issues we are suffering. Okay, where one was directly what you call exposed to the disaster or witness to the disaster can have all that and the reactions which we would have given. So all these things can happen at the emotional level, cognitive level, behavior level, and physiological experiences where stress, what you call, stress can occur. Now, when you talk about the survivors, if their debt is gone, but remember, I mean, when there is a survivability and what is their what you call reactions. So this depends upon the what you call three conditions. One is the disaster characteristics, how the disaster was, how the severity of the disaster. Then individual characteristics, how what you call the person were able to manage the disaster. Third one is the response characteristics. Now, how the other way we could have got a help. So it is the predictors of survivors reactions are based on these things: condition of the disaster, condition of the individual, and condition of the response. So these three things are important in defining the survivor reactions. Now, when you talk about the characteristics, as we said, it could be based on the size, cause, expected or unexpected, and the timing, because these things matter a lot. Because if the size is severe, like in terms of scope or intensity or duration, definitely it has got an impact. Cause, whether it's natural or human made, because sometimes some disasters would happen because of the human errors. So whether that also depends on the survivor reactions. Then predicted or unpredicted, or if say expected or unexpected. If it is expected, that some kind of mental preparations would be there, but if it's unexpected, there's absolutely no such what you call preparations would be there, and that can cause more stress. Then timing, like it can be time of the day, because daytime almost we are active, but suppose if it happens in the night, imagine the condition. Then suppose it was weekends or weekdays, suppose it's a specific season, all these will have what you call impact on the human being. Now, because of these things, there are a lot of consequences out there, and the consequence would be many. Basically, we start with the physical consequence, where basically it's a vast destruction and a lot of injuries and what you call mortality, because we have seen any accidents or any earthquakes, what amount of destruction we have seen, and the injury which is caused, and number of deaths or casualties also been recorded on the physical side. Mental health, which is our focus point, where various forms of stress are very common, which we'll be discussing in much more detail. Then, as psychologists, there is a lot of saying that there are more mental health injuries than physical injuries, because physical injuries somewhere one can treat through a medicine, give some article this one, but what to do with the psychological this one? Where is the behavioral medicine and the qualified personnel for that? That's another thing. Then mental health of community before disaster will determine how resilient after disaster. Now, this is what I want to give a best example of Japan, where Japan is highly prone to what you call earthquakes. I think all of you know about it. And the amount of psychological readiness they have to face any such disaster is marvelous or alarm. This one, where it is astonishing, I will say, because their mental preparation is so ready to face any such what you call disasters, especially when it comes to earthquake and all. So much so that when few years back, when earthquake happened in Japan, they were psychologically so prepared so that when the roads were completely gone because of the earthquake, within 3 days they built back, which could be a dream in our country. So that's the idea, where mental health of a community, how strong they are. Then mental health services, because no, all of you remember, few years back there was a big earthquake in Nepal, and so many people what you call suffered, and under the able guidance of the then Dr. Ashok Pai, because now is no more, a team was what you call framed, a team was formulated to go to Nepal as behaviorists and counselors and to guide them. But unfortunately, because of the decline from the Nepalese government, the Indian team couldn't go there because they didn't want that counseling part and all. So even how services are planned also important, so that we can what you call plan the things for them, so that they can effectively manage the loss which has happened because of the any type of the disaster. Then when you talk about what you call what happens exactly on a psychological level, the typical disaster response pattern. So one is basically the person what you call loses his what you call attention, which leads to distractibility. Small things can trigger the person, because the person is under tension, and person is under tension of not only the financial loss, it could be loss of the close ones. So that might bring a lot of distractibility, and this depends upon how long this went on, and what is the range of things happened, and how much is being what you call damage has happened on a psychological level, which is getting affected by duration, sequence, and distortion. Then even what you call it has been studied among what you call school going children and all. So definitely because of this part, there was a declining schoolwork performance. Now when there is, because when the children also focused on how to get out of this what you call post events because of the disaster, their what you call schoolwork performance also reduced, because they were more bothered about resettling themselves. So that's the idea. Then recurrent intrusive recollections, we so-called flashbacks, where what happened, and this can have a lot of impact, especially in the childhood stage, where we call it as a what you call a trauma experience, and relapse of trauma psychologically, not on a physical level, which might bring lot of psychological consequences even at the adult stage when they grow up. Then there could be nightmares, because of they think a lot over each and every one. Now there could be nightmares. They may not even sleep properly, and they might develop either mild or major psychopathological symptoms. Now, this is what we talked about the thinking level or cognitive level. Now, on the behavior level, what happens? Now, on the behavior level, we find usually, especially on the child level, it will not leave the parent. It can happen even at the vertical, very natural level. Whenever the child threatened, it just runs to mother or father and just attaches it. Same thing can happen with the elders too when they are facing or immediately after the disaster, the events which are happening on a behavioral side, and the person might feel isolation because if there is a lives lost, if there is a vertical, this one, when there is a lives lost, human lives are lost, and especially the near and dear ones, that might bring a lot of isolation, and it has got lot of what you call problems in the future, because typical isolation leads to what you call a kind of a low mood, and this low mood can slowly get into the low levels of depression, and because of this low levels of depression, and if there is nobody is going to take care of the person, it might end up with the high levels of depression. And you know the results of high levels of depression, where the person might be committing even suicide or having suicidal ideations when there is no one of the persons in the known group, then it can have a big impact. Then thrill seeking behaviors. This is what I saw last time in the metro. This one, Chennai, what do you call, Chennai floods. Somebody went to this thrill seeking. When, along with the flood, they were swimming. I don't know how many of you, what do you call, witnessed that when government and other agencies are trying to resolve the issues, and some of the youngsters were enjoying that flood, which is not expected. Then sometimes it could be reenactments of the trauma that also can happen. The person might get back to the reenactment, that that's the same thing what you call now flashback. Then might lead to increased substance abuse. The person might get into more alcoholism usage, or more smoking and other related substance abuse, because of the what you call, to just to forget the bad incident what they think was a disaster on a personal level or on a community level. Then hypervigilance, extra carefulness, this one extra careful. For small things also, the person will become more attentive, which is not really good in a sense, because it unnecessarily produces more adrenaline, and you know more adrenaline rush is not good, because equal amount of noradrenaline has to be poured to manage the system. Regular pouring of what you call adrenaline because of the hypervigilance might lead to what you call type A behavior. I think you know that, who are what you call type A behavior, or restless, irritable, and all, and might have more proneness to cardiac issues. So that also there is a problem. It's not that one time it's happening; it could be a chain reaction. Then elevated startle reflex, for small things, the person is so what you call attentive. For small things also, there could be hyper reaction. We call it as a startle reflex, because of they think all the time that something bad is going to happen. Even any minor provocation might end up in elevated startle reflex. Can happen at all these things can happen on a behavioral level. Then when you talk about that on a physical level, typically the first thing what we talk about is the shock, where the person is stunned, or in our own word, the person will become a statue, where person is not able to move. Person is still under that condition, where still condition, where person is not able to take up that what you call situation, and a person will not be reacting at all, and that we technically we refer it as a shock. Then because of these all these things are happening, there could be a problem with the sleeping patterns. So the person might end up with the lack of sleep. Now that is technically called as insomnia. And since the person is all the time having shock systems, person is not able to sleep well, might continue with the loss of appetite, or technical again this what you call we call it as anorexia nervosa, where person is not willing to eat, and that may have a lot of issues on the physical health later, where enough energy is not supplemented because of the irregular eating and all. So this have a lot of impact on the health of the individual. Then headaches. So two types of headache usually they record. One is the tension headache, and the one is the migraine headache. So what happens is when the headaches would begin, I know that's what you call basically or psychological in nature, not because of the physical or environmental issues. We do headache. We do get headaches. For example, if we are facing a sunlight continuously facing the sun, it might bring a headache, but it's a very temporary when it will go. But these things can have a lot of what you call the disasters can bring on a physical level headaches. It might turn it as migraine headache, where these headaches can go for hours together, and it's really a shooting pain. Then elevated vital signs. Then when you talk about vital signs, please understand the vital signs are nothing but our what you call the measures which are basically we say hemodynamics, where you talk about blood pressure, okay, then uh, respiratory rate, pulse rate, and all they go high. Now that might end up in what you call uh, vital related diseases like high blood pressure. Okay, then so many things can happen on a physical level. So all these what you call happening on the physical level, where shock symptoms, insomnia, loss of appetite, headaches, muscle weakness, and elevated blood pressures and related ones. Now that all we talked about the physical level, behavioral level, and cognitive level. Now when it comes to the affective level, because of the disaster, what you call happened, that the response can go more on the feeling level. Now we talked about the thinking. Now talked about the body side. Talked about the action side. Now what happens when it comes to the feeling side? Now the mere first and foremost aspect is it's a depression and anxiety, and I don't have to explain much about it. Any disaster which has what you call its own what you call intensity, and where the individuals who are what you call affected or simply called as victims will definitely suffer from depression and anxiety. Depression is like having what you call loss of hope, whereas anxiety is the apprehension of threat, that what happens next or what is next. So this has got its own way of what you call affecting our mind and body. That's where depression and anxiety. Numbness, which is connected to shock, where a numbness is what you call no reaction from the what you call person. The person will become totally blind, what you call mute to the situation, and still he is under the condition of a so-called shock, and it's very really difficult to get out when the person has really seen the disaster and he has been the victim of the disaster. So once he's been victimized, what you call the person might suffer with the numbness. Then there is a constricted effect where the person try to reduce everything to a smaller this one. So this has got again what you call a psychological impact on the individual, followed by the guilt, shame, and the fear. The guilt because he is not able to do anything, because now if it's an environmental disaster or any disaster, the person having a lot of guilt that he cannot do or he couldn't make others to survive, where he could have tried his level best, but that guilt can what you call has not of a lot of negative impact on the individual. So please understand. Then the shame, like no, when he has lost everything, people might laugh at him, and this might he might consider that it's a shame for him that is not able to bounce back to the normal. Then the fear responses, because what next? It's not only anxiety, because when it comes to fear, and if the person has some commitment earlier, and when he lost everything because of any one type of disaster, now the fear emerges that how to fulfill the commitments. It could be on the personal side, it could be on the financial side, or it could be on the interpersonal side. Then intolerance of fear response, because they don't want to keep themselves quiet, the feelings will go very wrong, so the fear response will be not tolerated, then that might end up in other reactions. Then global pessimism. Now here global pessimism in the sense it is from the individual side, that the individual look at the future as on the darker side rather than the brighter side. So think that when any disaster has happened, now the person thinks is that life is over. So a lot of pessimism rather than optimism, because the person has lost almost everything, and this might bring him some kind of negative moods, and these moods can have what you call a lot of negativity rather than positivity. So this might bring him again down. Later we are going to discuss about the stress disorders and all, where the pessimism as such that you're thinking negative for the future can bring lot of what you call ill health conditions, starting from psychosomatic disorders to PTSD, post traumatic stress disorders can happen. Another important thing what happens in what you call a disaster event is the grief. Could be temporary one, but it's a natural reaction to loss. So we do have that grief when we when you lose someone what you call very near or dear ones, definitely we'll end up in a grief, but it lasts for a few days. So then it plays an important role in the understanding of trauma, because the moment the person start grieving, it gives some kind of understanding. But remember, it's a very strong and overwhelming emotion, because after only he gets what you call some kind of relief. So the grief acts as a what you call ventilation technique here. So by merely grieving, the person might get some kind of relief. Then depending upon the condition, the children experience grief differently. That's the idea. Then some where people have ongoing difficulties that can interfere in their everyday life. People have already problems. Now some disaster happens, this might aggravate. So that's the idea here in this sentence, because that's where what you call there will be a differential reaction to what you call we call it as a differential reaction, because how we react to the what you call any such disasters based on our personality. But anyway, when the person is grieving, so it has got 5 stages. The first stage itself is a denial. That means what? We don't want to accept that something has happened. Same thing, somebody dies at our family level. The first thing is we deny it, because we say, no, no, we don't think that the person is dead. The same thing like it has happened to me. So this is where we talk about the denial. But once slowly you come to that, that's a reality. So when you're not able to, what you call, plan the things properly to accept it, then the anger comes, because something has happened and you try to deny it, and in reality you cannot deny it. So now it turns into anger, and that's anger is remember, please what you call it is what you call a negative emotion rather than a positive emotion, because many times anger led to violence. So from denial, the person turns into anger mood, because of the devastating issues. Now comes the bargaining, the next level. The person tries to adjust. It is like, okay, okay, somehow I'll adjust. One simple kind of aspect is, if a person into old age dies, we try to first deny it. Then anger comes, why God has to take him so fast, he was so doing well and all. But then there is a bargaining comes. The bargain is nothing but, at least she has lived for so many years. That's a bargain, like, no, okay, somehow okay, we may not live that much, but the person has lived at least so many years. Okay, I think he has led a full life. This is where what you call you try to have a compromise with the incident. Like, even when a disaster, if some property loss is there, the person might say, it is better, at least some property is still left, it is not affected by any earthquake or any other disaster. The kind of bargaining comes. Then, but once that bargain somewhere you want to accept, then comes the depression, because now the mood goes into the negative side, because now you are under what you call a condition called a psychological condition called as depression. So depression automatically brings a low mood, and this low mood slowly makes the person to accept, yes, this has happened, and I have to accept the truth. So that's the idea where the entire 5 stages as given by Kubler, and all these things happen in anywhere what you call such reactions would happen, like devastation happens because of the disasters. It could be earthquake, it could be flood, it could be what you call like COVID-19. Okay, anything where the grief is quite common and which goes into 5 stages. Then that is one thing what we talk about the grief part, but much more than that, we have to discuss about the disaster and stress reaction. Because remember, whenever what you call a disaster happens, and there is a reaction from both body and the mind, the physical and psychological side, where body also faces some kind of stress as well as our mind also face some kind of psychological stress. Because whenever disaster happens, we feel that we are under what you call threat, or the challenges are in front of us. Now we have to plan. But before planning, what are the 4 phases of stress reaction? So we say what you call it happens at 4 levels, which is what you call at acute phase, reaction phase, repair phase, and reorientation phase. Now, when you talk about acute phase, we'll discuss more about that. Then reaction and repair and reorientation, where the person tries to manage the stress in 4 different stages. But how do we give reaction is more important. When you talk about acute phase, it is something like immediate, because the reactions could be last for minutes. How the person is going to give a reaction, which can be for minutes, which can be even for hours, because again it depends on the severity of the disaster, or it can be leading to days, because if what you call if the severity or the threat or the loss is very high, the acute phase can go for many days. Now, very next idea is fight or flight response. Either you have to face the reaction, or you have to run away from the reaction or the uh, disaster. The person is either has to leave from the place, or person has to face the disaster. So we call it as a fight or flight mode response. Now this actually typically involves the physical activity rather than psychological activity. Psychological activity to decide what to do, fight or flight. Flight is just taking oneself out from the disaster situation or disaster place and moving to some other place, whereas fight is you actually face the situation. That's the idea. Whatever happens, I will not move. So can happen. So then what happens? There will be narrowing of focus. So when there is a acute phase, people are not willing to listen. I don't know how many of you know that. There's a decreased ability to think properly because of this acute phase, and the person is under threat and is planning either fight or flight reaction. Now the thinking capacity or decision making, what you call, might reduce. Then there could be emotional reactions too, like disbelief or consternation or lack of detachment. Person thinks that I have still my property, but there is no property at all. Then there could be a rigid behavior. What is that rigid behavior? The person will become change his style of functioning, where the person is highly irritable now, and you can see the person with a lot of anger mood, aggressive, and all which leads to violence. This is on the people who are what you call on psychologically on the stronger side, but still not able to manage. But those who are on psychologically weaker side, the typical features are they are sad, they do cry, and there is no what you call, since all this what you call sad or cryness, a kind of attention also given by others, which affects the communication too. But remember, panic also could be there. Panic is extreme form of what you call fear. Usually we say fear, phobia, and all this we classify. But panic also can happen. But in panic is the extreme reaction to a disaster. We say panic reactions. It's much more than anxiety, fear, or phobia. In such cases, immediate attention to be given to the individual, otherwise there is a problem. So we say panic reaction, and this can happen when the disaster is happening without the knowledge of the individual, without anticipation. Something immediately happened and the person has got no idea about it, might end up with the panicky condition. Panic is extreme form of fear, and one has to manage in efficient way, otherwise there is the threat for the life. Then the second phase, okay, we have seen what you call the acute phase. Now it goes to the second phase of reaction phase. Now what happens? Now it can be what you call, and since the disaster has happened, now the reaction can go from one week to 6 weeks, because now the disaster is what you call happened, almost 1 week is over. Now what happens at the next level? So there is a delayed reaction. Person will not what you call manage well, because there is a problem with the decision making. Previously repressed or denied feelings may surface. Now the person may start again crying, again remembering those things can happen, and they'll be overwhelmed and bringing powerless, because right now they don't have any idea that how much they lost, and they think they're totally lost. They might think that they're powerless, and then they show different reactions. What are those? Fear of returning to the site of the event, going back. Yes, I want to go back to the site or place where disaster has happened, if it's a physical level. Or they might end up with the nightmares, like bad dreams. So when there is what you call such things are there, they may not even what you call sleep well, nightmares, anxiety, restlessness, everything can happen, and these are happening in the reaction to the event. Then there could be muscle tension, shaking or tremor, entire body shivers, and startle responses. For small things, the person will be giving exaggerated responses. We have seen enough cases. Then increased irritability, already we have discussed, and isolation, depression also we have seen. Then lot of thoughts which are not good in their nature, they are highly disturbing. Here the meaning of disturbing events like survival, whether I survive, what is the future part of about it, relief, whether psychological relief as well as what you call the physical relief, they'll think about it. Then the guilt feeling that he couldn't do anything that he could have managed. Then the grief part, already we have discussed in detail, which all can happen in the second phase called as a reaction phase. Then comes the repair phase. Now this is a quite lengthy period. Now because in the initial acute phase, the person has got a lot of reactions which might slightly reduce in the reaction phase. Now there is some more what you call activities would happen. Now we call it as a repair phase. The idea here is, when you talk about repair phase, remember it is less intense and not so overwhelming, because now at least now after disaster 1 month is over, now the person is coming to realize that, okay, and he is in a stage that okay, he has to accept. So that is the issue. So now the reaction what we give to others is less intense and not so overwhelming. Now will not jump and cry, or now will not give a sudden reaction, because now the repair mechanism has started. But now still he feels the pain and hurt, because still that things are not gone, but now he can manage with the things which in earlier two phases he was finding it difficult to manage. So that's the idea. Now slowly the person tries to get back to his normalcy. Now the person thinks of getting back to his job, getting back to what you call trying to find out his relatives, and to find some meaning in life, so that he wants to continue his life further in a better way. So that now he can start making some kind of plans. Okay, whatever is happened is happened. Now the next job is to make something good. So how to make that something good, that depends upon how best the person plans. So this all happens when you talk about the repair phase. At the last phase, now it is called as a reorientation phase. Now remember, in reorientation phase has what you call almost a condition that okay, that person is trying to come back completely now, but this what you call lasts for 6 months, because not so easy, because after a event has happened, especially a disaster, so it takes at most 6 months to 1 year. Now what happens is, now the stress reactions would now reduce, because now it is now 6 months, and now the person thinks that he has to accept and he has to manage the life well, which has been gone some clue in the repair phase. Now it can be made more concrete in the reorientation phase. Now grief reaction may not be resolved. Still the person, if it is what you call relatives or the near and dear ones lost ones, the reaction is not solved, but now the person has to accept, yes, the people who are what you call gone or died, they are died, but what to do, because it's not under our hand, it's not under our what you call our control. So this is where what you call the reactions would begin. Now whatever those nightmares and whatever those things what you call anxiety part and insomnia and all, they slowly now go out, so that all these reactions will diminish or reduce gradually. Now the person thinks what is important at the present, that how to manage the life better. So that's where the person will try almost what you call trying to come to what you call the normalcy, and in severe cases it may take what you call few years, but in a minimum of it takes 6 months to 1 year to get back to complete normalcy. So that's the idea. So then what happens exactly in what you call stress reactions? And if you see, there's a big list of things. So we call it as a PTSR, post-traumatic stress reactions. Now, what exactly, if you see the screen, the things, or what you call, the person doesn't want to remember that what has happened. We call it as a selective forgetting. The person knows it, but that the person doesn't want to go for more for it. Then avoid talking of the trauma. People try to, whenever other person raises the what you call issue, the person says, no, let's not talk about it, because it brings more pains for me. So let's not talk about the trauma part at all. Fine, the person goes ahead with that. Then because of these things, the person will be easily frightened, even is just a little bit remembering things. Then as usual, negative mood will persist, negative thinking would persist, and always person will be alert, not a good idea. Then the person will avoid the places which he thinks that it is what you call brings a kind of disaster or distress in him. He'll avoid the places. He might even avoiding the activities, because if it's what you call tsunami, or if it is like a flood, the person might avoid the water, or water related activities can happen. Flashbacks are another thing that person might get. Then because of this, person is not able to concentrate on his studies or work, whichever the field is. If he's a student, he may not be able to concentrate, whereas if it's a what you call other people like teaching or other people, person may not be able to teach well, person may not be able to do his desktop job well, especially in government jobs. So there could be problems as reactions. Then aggressive behavior is another thing where we discussed already. Then loss of interest, because when any person loses near and dear ones, the idea is the person becomes more philosophical, and on the psychological mode, he thinks that there is no meaning in life, there is no purpose in life. Because he or she has lost everyone in their life, what you call, in their vicinity or in their life. Now that might bring in a lot of negative issues like loss of interest, feeling guilt already discussed, substance abuse also we discussed, and because of this thinking of all the time, there are complaints that they are not slept for months together. They go to the bed, but the problem is they find it difficult to sleep because they don't get to sleep. And even within the sleep, if they get, there could be bad dreams or nightmares. Again, the repetition of the events they might dream, and which can spoil their mental health too. So that's the idea in post-traumatic stress reactions. Continue to further psychological reactions when we talk. Okay, on the first phase, I've just shown a article tsunami picture there. So three things are what you call important. in the first phase, that is the threat followed by warning, and third one is the impact, the psychological reactions. Now, when you talk about the threat, remember, it's a time before impact, potential hazards of threats for community is the psychological reaction. What will happen? Because the potential hazards, what will happen if what you call tsunami comes, if earthquake happens, or suddenly new COVID-19, the what you call the new variant already is there in Kerala. So that's the issue where the threat begins. Then there is a warning where already, I think in our Karnataka, the communities have already got a warning regarding a disaster might come in a what you call COVID variant. So be careful. Psychological reaction, what how we give. Then the time varies what you call between whatever happens, because the anticipation itself has a lot of issues. Now the next part is about the what you call event part. What happens, that is also important. When the event part happens, when something is happening, how the disaster is occurring, and again it depends upon what you call how the reactions we give depending upon the condition of the disaster. So when you talk about the condition of the disaster, how aggressive it is, how simple it is, now all that one has to assess during the event, and the impact of it also to be handled very what you call the idea. When you talk about impact, what will be the what you call cost incurred. I'm talking about more of psychological costs rather than financial costs, which might have their own implications. So that all thing happens, please remember, it happens at the first phase. Now slowly we move to the second phase, where we call it as a heroic honeymoon and inventory. In the second phase, okay, the heroic phase here basically is to try to help to others. Many people do that at the risk of their lives. So immediately after disaster, there are a lot of people try to rescue others, and many times they have lost their lives. We call it as altruism. You help others and tax yourself. So even altruism can be planned. Okay. Then remember, if something happens to them, there's nobody to take care of them. So, but it's a heroic reaction. Then comes honeymoon, because when you talk about the honeymoon, don't think that our honeymoon what we talk about now, this happens on riding on help of NGOs and the government, where government assistance as well as NGO assistance and lot of flood relief would come or relief would come, and there is a lot of vertical help is rendered by others, which you would see, which we have seen many times, especially a few years back when it happened in Kurg. So how many people donated free things, and people who are there try to accept them, and they enjoyed the government and the relief given by others. So that condition is called as honeymoon condition. Then inventory part, where now the victims later become survivors. Now they understand that whatever the disease or the disaster resources which they have got, it cannot last for a longer time, and now they are physically or emotionally exhausted and discouraged, because now the idea is whatever they have got is not just enough. It is only temporary or momentarily there is a relief, but there is this relief has not come in a specific way which they expected, which can help them in a longer duration, which is not, which might bring them or put them into physical and emotional exhaustion, as well as what you call the discouragement for them. So that's about the second phase. But in the final phase, what we discuss, the same thing can happen: disillusionment, reconstruction, and recovery, where now there's a lot of disillusion was their false perception. Now this is now they come to reality that okay, we have to work ourselves and we have to manage by ourselves, because whatever the help rendered by the government or other agencies is just not enough. to manage the things. So it is better reconstruct the psychological issues as well as the physical issues are can be much better, which might lead to what you call a recovery part. Okay, so that what happens is that uh, when a recovery begins, the idea is can take more years, but remember, after the disaster, they have to rebuild the physical property and they have to manage their emotional well-being. Now, this is where the important part is required, which ultimately leads to a good recovery. Now, we continue further where there are more important issues are there. Now, how the phases of emotional response would occur. Think of this. Emotion on the left side, you have got emotional highs and emotional lows, and there is a pre-disaster which is happening, and there is a big impact which is happening on the other side. There's a heroic way of raising back with the honeymoon part, but there is an inventory which blocks and which cause disillusionment. Now the person goes to emotional low. If you see this part, because the disillusionment and this one might bring the person's emotional low. But when the reconstruction begin, if you see the graph is raising, and if you see that it is on the emotional highs. So whatever the scene, the because reconstruction will not happen just before 1 year. So up to 1 year, the person might face what you call heroic reaction, honeymoon reaction, impact as well as disillusionment. But after 1 year, there could be a reconstruction. The psychologists we refer it as a new beginning, because when you talk about a new beginning, that means you are starting a new life. So when such cases happen, now there's the phases of emotional response. In nutshell, what we are talking about. Then we have what you call other psychological issues like resistance, resilience, and recovery. Now, one picture will what you call show give all this meaning. It's written very clearly down but not out. This means what? Yes, we are threatened, we are suffered, but still we are in the scene. So that is more important. So the resistance is nothing but one try to defend against manifestation of distress, impairment, or dysfunction. That is you try to resist or try to block. Resilience, you try to come back fast, because when you talk about resilience, the psychological distress would come. Try to come back to normal position. Then the recovery, regain the ability to function adaptively, because now you have to get back to normal way, and you have to cover up the distress, impairment, or dysfunction which has happened. So these things can happen. Now the more important thing is how we manage and how we have to guide others. So how to manage what you call things using healthy coping skills, because usually we require a kind of skills. Now one thing is its ability to orient oneself rapidly matters a lot. Now what is orienting? Now understand what is happening, and yes, what next to do, that is more important, and it should be done in a very quick succession, not in a delayed way. By then, if you are guiding someone, the person may lost interest, or person may lost interest in life itself. He may be demotivated. Better not to do that. So have the good ability to orient oneself rapidly. Second thing is, you have decided something what to do. Once you have decided something, plan and execute. That is more important. You have to plan and execute the things in a what you call precise manner. Then when these two things are done, planning is good, execution is happening. Now one has to use them appropriately. So when they use the things appropriately, using what you call assistance resources, where you can get a lot of help from others, but don't misuse them. That's the idea. Then tolerance of uncertainty without resorting to impulsive action. This is more important. Never get into impulsive action, because that might bring what you call the thought or flashback of the what you call the disaster. Not a good idea. So but if you tolerate of uncertainty without resorting to impulsive action, then it's good. So the idea is you should have enough patience, because when we talk about uncertainty, we don't know what happens next. But are you ready to wait for it rather than going for an impulsive action? That's not good. But have tolerance. That's the idea. Then appropriate expression of painful emotions. It's not as unnecessary expressions of painful emotions. I've seen sometimes in TV and all, there's all inappropriate expression of painful emotions. Something has happened, and whenever the what you call government officials or the state representatives, when they go, there will be inappropriate expression of painful emotions. They cry like as if something, everything is gone, as if to just to attract the attention. This is not expected. Rather than that, appropriate what you call expression of painful emotions is also advocated better. And these are the things where we are talking about the healthy coping skills, but there could be unhealthy coping skills which you have to guide or orient the students or the others, where unhealthy coping skills, excessive denial and coping skills. Remember, when you talk about excessive denial and the coping skills, the idea is the person doesn't want to accept the things and tries to avoid so many things. But how long this can happen? One or other day, the person has to accept the things. And if the person uses excessive denial or avoidance, he might end up in he might end up in psychopathology, either in the mild form or in the severe form. So impulsive behavior, I lost something, so I don't want to. That person might get into impulsive behavior. Not a good idea, because again it has got a negative this one impact. Then over dependence. I have lost something, but I'm dependent more on others. How long the person can be dependent on others? It brings a toxicity, or nowadays we call it as a toxic relationship, where unnecessary over dependence on the person might get them to what you call a rejection. So the person might get a rejection sensitivity mode. So not a good idea to have over dependence. Then inability to evoke caring feelings from others. Now this is where we talk about attention seeking, not a good idea. Then emotional suppression. So in psychology we say whenever the person has to ventilate the emotions, especially sadness, depression or crying, we usually allow them to cry. We say ventilate. So the moment they are ventilated, they feel what you call little relaxed. So ventilation plays a major role. But when we don't allow others to ventilate, that leads to emotional suppression. So when the emotional suppression comes, that has got negativity in the mind, and this negative mind can affect our body. Then another thing is what you call substance abuse part. So because of disaster happened, something loss has happened, something or bigger thing, the person might get into what you call a coping skill as drinking excessively, or the substance abuse part, where the person is thinking like by drinking I can what you call get over my problems, or by smoking or any other drug abuse. It is only, you have to make it them clear that it's only temporary, not a permanent solution, and the substance abuse can bring lot of other health issues as well as legal issues. So these are the unhealthy coping skills which one which highlight not to use among the victims or those who are witnessing what you call the disasters. Then how the cultural factors influence disaster reactions and coping skills also is one of part of our discussion. For example, national origin, I talked about Japan already. Customs and traditions, how we feel about it, how long we lived there. The language part also important. Age and generation, the gender also, religious and political beliefs about disaster, perception of the family and community, how they feel about it, our own health, well-being, disability, physical ability or limitations, our socio-economic status definitely matters. Education level has own its influence, as well as geographic location, where do we live, also has influence. So likewise, there are many factors which might influence our disaster reactions and coping skills. So quickly moving to the what you call mental health part of it, why mental health intervention is required. That's the last part of our discussion. I will turn to this one. When you talk about the previous way of doing it, traditional mental health interventions, they address what people tell themselves for the rest of their lives. Now, remember, traditional mental health interventions, like what can be done? But the meaning of event to a person, when there's a distressing event happens, when it has immediate reactions, what meaning it gives is more important. Now, when you talk about this, the early interventions are important. They can mitigate need for long-term care by addressing immediate reactions to distressing event. Now, remember, whenever does any kind of mental health intervention, please look into the long-term care rather than what you call the short-term care. Why? Because a short-term care person might feel what you call good enough to manage the things for a shorter duration. But if the disasters are repeating, because based on the geographical or any other what you call constraints, now they need to be taught how to manage. Doesn't mean that they have to depend all the time on a counselor or a group of counselors to assist them, because they should be now empowered with the how to manage the things. That's why I said long term care rather than short term care. And based on the hierarchy of needs, one can manage. I don't want to talk about much about that. Okay. So how to assist the survivors? So there are some few essential attributes and skills which you can manage. One is good listening skills. You should have, because before what they say, you cannot come to a decision. We have that problem. Usually we want to tell, but we don't want to listen. That's the one thing. So one should have good listening skills. One should have enough patience, because many times they don't open up for few minutes or hours. You cannot say you're not talking, I'm going out. No, you should wait for them. Have enough patience. Then caring attitude, like there should be some form of sympathy to be involved. Trustworthiness is another thing. They should believe you, or it should not be a drama. Then being approachable and culturally sensitive, that when the belief system comes, you are easily approachable and culturally sensitive, because how you react is based on a particular culture and how they receive you. If it's on a community level, you should be very careful about what you call understanding the culture and how can what you call manage the things better. Then you should be non-judgmental. It could be based on the religion, based on the location or the geography or the language part. So I speak Kannada, so I should only speak Kannadigas. No, that's a kind one should not have. One should be non-judgmental and flexible and tolerant of all these ups and downs, because you should be flexible enough to manage. You should be tolerant. These are the skills one has to develop to manage the disaster, and that is called as psychological first aid. You must have heard of regular first aid, but there is a concept called as psychological first aid. So in psychological first aid, we talk about how to assist people immediately after the disaster, because sometimes disasters are too much, houses are lost, lives are lost, and the person is alone. Now how to manage them? In such cases it is more of psychological issue in nature. So now the psychological first aid, there are several modules are available. This is to reduce the initial distress of children, adolescent families, everyone. Then which will begin immediately following the disaster. People will not wait for it. So what are the core principles if we talk about it? So core principles here, managing contact and engagement, because one thing is you have to have in touch with them and put them in some activity so that they think less about it. Affirming them safety and comfort is the second level. Third level, stabilize them with their emotions with a lot of techniques. Then information gathering, that how best you can help them out and what are the other things are available. Then assisting practice also important, practical assistance. Then connecting with the social support like NGOs or any foreign agencies or this one. Then how to manage, you can give a lot of psycho education by giving a lot of information. Then linkage with the collaborative agencies, which already talking about. So this is where the core principles are managed through psychological first aid. But what you can do having the psychological first aid, that is more important. Think of these things. One can promote safety among the individual, psychological safety, calmness, that is more important, because we in psychology we say don't take any action when you're angry, don't take any decision when you're angry, because The two things I want to tell you now. Don't take any article decision when you are very happy or when you are very angry. It's dangerous. It's not only when you are angry, if you take this is not good. When you are happy, when you take a decision, it might be negative later. So promoting calmness important. Promoting connectedness is another thing. Improving self-efficacy, like putting self-confidence in the person, and it can promote helping nature. So what happens for first responders? What one should not do, I'm highlighting, one should not force people to share their stories with you. Please, 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 I'm telling you, don't force them to tell what has happened, because the moment if you force them, they think they want more things, personal things from your side. No, it's not required, because you know that already what has happened. Then you have to start with giving simple assurances like, fine, everything will be in line, or it's okay, fine. Then now you have to summarize that why you think that they have suffered, because they may not be able to understand, to grasp the things, what made them that suffering. Now you have to delineate what makes them to suffer like this. Then please do not make any promises that cannot be kept. Please, this is important. Don't make any promises. You say, I'll build a house, do something, and later you don't do that. That's a very negative thing of it is. Then don't criticize or comment on the existing services or relief efforts. What this government is doing, what is NGO is doing, they're all doing bad. Don't do that, because that will be demotivating them. Demotivating, and by chance, if NGOs come to know that, they might stop doing things which at least some need was there. Now that is also gone. So please don't do these things. Don't force the people to share their stories. Don't give them assurance. Don't what you call give them simple assurances. Like if you give simple assurances, it might have what you call, when you say everything will be okay, how can it be okay? They might question, I've lost so many things. How can you say it go okay? So don't just give the things. Then don't give your own analogy like this should have happened, this is why it happened. Don't give from your side, not a good idea. Don't make any promises. Don't criticize existing services, because all these things have what you call have negative impact on the person who is receiving it. Then how to manage intense emotions? The person, you cannot control their emotions, so you have to have really good patience now. Communicate calmly. You have to communicate warmth, a kind of oneness, and showing that feeling of goodness. Establish a good relationship. Then go for a specific way of questioning, so that help person focus rather than vague questions. Then you have to have some deal, like come to agreement about something, where something you have to come out from the disaster issue. You have to have some agreement kind of thing. Then speak to person with respect. The person is totally hopeless or helpless now. Now you have to give a lot of respect with the humanity is more important. Then seek immediate assistance if person becomes threatening or does not respond. This is more important. Sometimes what happens is there could be suicidal ideation or harming others. So now immediately you have to identify that and immediately you have to inform. That is more important. So the next part what we are going to discuss is what you call the last part, what you call making referrals. When you talk about the making referrals, please what you call identify this. Usually we have the referral. Okay, when we are not able to handle, we ask another person to handle who is having more capacity or who is having more expertise than us. The referrals are better, so that they can handle better. So when you refer it, see to that what you call how you make it. So these are things where you have to think of. When the person gives the idea of talking about or thinking about suicide, immediately you have to refer. Okay, there could be a problem with the child abuse or criminal activity. Because of this, yes, referral is required. Social isolation also is a cause of referral. Then problem is beyond your training or capabilities, because the problem you cannot even guess what could be the intensity. Better you don't handle, refer further. The person who is might think of in a risky or threatening behavior, referral is required. Then remember, when you people talk about what you call suicide, they usually they are in the planning of a suicide. So the one day they might commit suicide. So an extra vigilance is important, which you are not able to do, but ask others to do. Then any threat, what you call, one has to handle seriously and has to be referred in consultation with the what you call higher authorities. That is more important. Then the last part is confidentiality part. Helping a person, okay, builds on trust and respect. If the person has come with lot of issues, keep it secret and help them on your level. Don't make it a big thing for the others. This might bring down the self-esteem of the person and he may not come next time to you. And all discussions you are done must be kept confidential and private. And remember, a personal information is personal information, because there could be a lot of things, not only about disaster part, there could be a lot of other personal issues. You are not taking to going to have a right over that information. Rather than you have to respect the feelings of your client or the victim and manage accordingly. But remember, only when you can breach the confidentiality, where you think that person is either doing what you call under threat, or he might what you call he might have the threatening personality for others, there could be possible dangers from him for others or himself. Then only in such cases one can breach the confidentiality. So these are the things which we are talking about, the psychological first aid and all. So we are already what you call crossed our time. So quickly, if you have got any questions, you can ask questions where I can try to answer, or you can even add something more. Remember, I have not talked about any physical issues. I talked about mostly on the psychological aspect of an victim, how he feels what you call helpless, hopeless, and completely devoid of any positive emotions. How we can help them whenever disaster happens, and assessing his mental health and management. That's what the focal point. Thank you once again. And if there are any quick queries, definitely we'll go for it. And we are waiting for the valedictory. But before that, any of the some quick queries or questions are there, please feel free to ask, or you can add your own experiences for the things which you are involved in a disaster management. Thank you.